Hello, and welcome to The Literary Life, the Penguin Group's celebration of the best writing and the best writers working today. I'm your host, Jake Morrissey. In this edition of The Literary Life, we're going to explore what is at the heart of all good writing and reading: inspiration, where it comes from, the different ways writers find it in themselves, and how editors help turn that writerly inspiration into books that we want to read and cherish. We have an inspiring show for you. We'll hear from Sigrid Nunez, whose provocative new novel, Salvation City, explores what happens when the world falls apart, and musician Joe Pernice, whose funny and touching novel, It Feels So Good When I Stop, is just out in paperback. And journalist and author Virginia Ironside joins us to weigh in on what provokes her irritation in this episode of The Writer's Rant. We'll also speak to the editor of the international bestseller The Help, about finding and working with the author of one of the most successful debut novels of the decade. Salvation City is an unexpected story from Sigrid Nunez, whose previous novels have all been based in the world around us. In this new novel, she creates a world very different and yet eerily recognizable from the one we know, a world ravaged by a deadly flu pandemic. Welcome. Salvation City, your new novel, takes place in a very specific area, which is Salvation City in southern Indiana. I think the fictional town Leap. Why you decided to set it in such a place?
Well, first of all, Little Leap is definitely fictional. And I thought for this particular story, setting it smack in the middle of America, in the crossroads of America, was appropriate. I'd never written about that part of the country before, and I have visited that part of the country, so I am somewhat familiar with it. But I wanted a place where the kind of community that Salvation City is would be found.
The novel itself centers on a boy whose parents die in a worldwide pandemic, and I'm interested in how you balance the kind of micro story of his own experience, Cole's experience, with the macro story of this worldwide phenomenon happening literally to individual people. Was that something that you intentionally tried to do? Because you handle it very well.
Thank you. It definitely evolved while I was writing the book. I mean, whenever I start a new novel, I always start with a character. And in this case, I knew that I wanted the main character of this novel to be male instead of female because that was something I hadn't done before. Then I thought that I would like to write about a younger person because that was also something I hadn't done before. And then I had this character, 13-year-old boy named Cole Vining. And once I had the character, I had to create a world for him to live and move in, and people for him to meet, and adventures for him to have. In other words, give him a story. So I knew about the Great Flu of 1918, of course. And I've known for a long time, as we all do, that scientists have been saying that it's not a question of if, but when. So I thought...
When another pandemic...
When another pandemic like this would be a strong possibility. And I thought, well, what if my character were caught up in this catastrophe, that there would be this kind of outbreak, and he would be orphaned by it, as children were during the Great Flu of 1918, including the writer Mary McCarthy. So then I was up and running.
You handle memory, I thought, very effectively in this novel, and the structure of the novel goes back and forth in time. And the idea of remembering or not remembering is very much a part of what Cole goes through, and also what some of the other characters go through as well. Talk a little bit about the idea of memory in this novel and also in your other books.
Well, I am very interested in memory. I'm particularly interested in how people's memories of their childhood influence the people that they become. So we all remember. This is something we all share. And as we all know, our memories are imperfect. We remember our pasts, and there are always certain past events that remain very, very alive in us. We live our lives, we forget a great deal of what happens to us. Then we remember imperfectly, we invent certain things, and all this brought together is how we create the story of our lives. In the case of Cole, he was very, very sick with the flu himself, although he did survive it. One of the symptoms of pandemic flu can be memory loss. He's got that to struggle with. And in addition, he has not only lost his parents, but practically everything that he's known. His whole way of life has changed.
That he has to relearn. One of the things I thought was fascinating about the novel was that you frame it so that Cole can't remember what he's remembered or forgotten sometimes.
So as far as time goes, I did want the story to take place in the near future. Cole and his family are living in Chicago. The flu breaks out almost immediately after they arrive there. Cole has just started school. He barely knows the other children when this happens. And all this was because I wanted them to be very isolated from the rest of the world so that I could play with this idea of what happens when everything is taken away from you.
But when you were writing the novel, how do you draw the inspiration from yourself to create the plot line, for example? Is there a particular process that you go through that engages you as a writer that you've kind of discovered over time?
Well, I don't think it would be possible for me if I didn't start with the character. I'm very curious about people. I'm very interested in what makes people tick. So once I have a character with a personality, then things tend to follow one from another.
Are you a deliberate writer? Or are you more impressionistic? In other words, do you try something to see if it works, and if it doesn't, you try something else?
The process is pretty straightforward because I'm one of those writers who doesn't make outlines, who doesn't take a lot of notes, and who is not really that interested in knowing the whole story beforehand, or even most of the story. In fact, I'm happiest knowing as little as possible what's going to happen once I have my people. It wouldn't be anywhere near as interesting for me to write knowing what was going to happen.
I'm interested in having you talk a little bit about your process as a writer.
It's extremely important to write every day.
Do you go to a certain place in yourself to farm ideas or characters? How does that work for you?
Reading other writers is really what does it. I mean, when I was a kid, when I wanted to be a writer, that's what it was. It wasn't that I thought I had wonderful stories. It was that I was reading these stories, and I thought I, too, would like to be able to do that.
What surprised you most about this novel when it was finished?
Oh, just that I got it done. I mean, there are all these points in the writing where you think, well, now, I don't know how this is going to go on. I don't really know how it's going to end. All these things are happening. Will I have the imagination and the stamina and everything else that's necessary to pull it off in a satisfactory way?
Thank you so much for joining us.